Hello, I'm Joshua Provan, a humble author, artist, and storyteller who not so humbly maintains a YouTube presence in which he is the star. Today, in the battle between my own vanity and my natural elusiveness, we are going to talk about movies. Specifically, the subject today is the 2003 historical action epic drama thriller blockbuster docudrama reality show The Last Samurai, starring Tom Cruise, Ken Watanabe, and Hiroyuki Sanada. I talk about Shogun, but my book is closer to the subject of this movie, so we're going to talk about this today, and there's nothing you can do about it. Except, stop watching, so balls in your court. Go watch the Shogunate's channel for information on that. So, a while back, I asked if anyone had any questions about this movie, and a few of you gave some really interesting questions related to late samurai history. And fruit. There were some things about fruit. But, much as I enjoy a good satsuma, I think we will stick with history for now. But before we start, I'm going to bring up two things which I find most interesting about this movie, from a historical and a movie watching perspective. The first is that in order to tell the story they wanted to tell, the director, Edward Zwick, and the writing staff created an alternate reality universe in which things are the same as they were in Meiji Japan, but are also different. The story is a redemption arc, which broadly fits into the white savior category of films, though in this, Tom doesn't do so much saving. But he feels a lot, and that is sometimes enough. Anyway, in order for our semi-alcoholic, mentally scarred, possibly complicit war criminal veteran of the wars against the Lakota and the Cheyenne to redeem himself, he must be placed in a new environment that can rebuild and rehabilitate him. For the purposes of the movie, this environment is offered by the domain or han of a samurai lord, played by Watanabe. And remember, this is an alternate universe, Meiji Japan, in which about 500 years of gun handling and manufacture and, oh yes, the Boshin War never happened. It's important, I promise. It's important to Tom. Stay with me. This ability to fight in a modern manner sees Tom whisked away to captivity and enlightenment amongst the open fields, towering mountains, Zen gardens, and country estates of a remote samurai village, which is also the HQ of a rebellion against the Meiji government. Here, the old ways have been preserved, and everyone seems to be a samurai. What in essence the movie does is to simplify the samurai or warrior class, known as the Bushi, into a tribe of simple warrior farmers fighting for tradition, rather than the remnants of middle and high nobility of pre-Meiji Japan fighting to retain their position in society. The movie is correct that the warrior class was on the way out. The open carrying of swords, which once identified a Bushi, was prohibited, for reasons you'll understand if you see the movie. The feudal Han system was being dismantled, and the traditions of the past were being formalized and codified to suit a new era. What it gets wrong is to cast the samurai as weaponized antiquarians. The revolution that overthrew the shogun was one of the noble classes. Power remained in these circles, but with a different face and more European clothes. It was the samurai themselves which had brought about the revolution that was to sweep away their dominance over society. The samurai you see in the movie are all rural pastoralists, but they should be mostly well-educated clerks and bureaucrats by this period. Many lords and daimyos did have country estates. There were fiefs and bodyguards. There were rural samurai, but they weren't all this way, and they rarely went into battle in their full armor by this period. But I keep forgetting, the Boshin War never happened. So, everything's okay. So the first thing to remember about this movie is that its depiction of the samurai is romanticized. That being said, it is weirdly accurate to what the Meiji and later Showa periods tried to do with Japanese history in spinning the warrior class as a kind of spiritual heritage of the Japanese people, which you can sort of see in the formal creation of Bushido by Inatsuo Nitobe.
That is Bushido.
And as Bushido forms a big part of this movie, I think it's fair to say that you aren't really seeing a realistic idea of what the Satsuma Rebellion of 1877 was about, or who fought in it. But you see a more general cultural aesthetic of what some Meiji and Showa era writers, historians, and artists wanted to memorialize. Though in the case of the former era, memorializing is the operative word because they wanted to get rid of the samurai and most of the Edo shogun operation. The story needed an easy way to move Tom's character along, and simplifying the samurai and extracting broad truths from more complicated narratives was the best way to do it in this sort of story. The second thing I want to point out is the battles, and especially the one at the end, what it does and why it does it. Generally speaking, movies are terrible at creating logical ways of killing people off. Characters will survive to the end of a movie and then die in completely contrived circumstances because they need to. There's no other reason. It's just, your time has come, scratch of the pen, he must die. Falls down a drain, throws himself on a grenade, it doesn't matter. The Last Samurai is better than most on this score, but the battles are interesting as larger expressions of this theme because of how they move the plot. The first battle is required as a statement piece. Tom needs to be captured. The samurai need to be feared. The battle makes no tactical sense even in a world where the Boshin War didn't exist. A cavalry charge through woods against prepared troops is fairly dumb. It's well handled though because we see that the troops are not disciplined enough to face down the attack. It's over pretty fast and the next act pretty much begins once it's done. At the end of the third act, the penultimate battle occurs, and you can tell that the director wanted to put some actual military logic into it. The samurai basically rout the advance guard of the Imperial Army in a fairly believable way. The samurai, however, then give up their advantage and lose. They do this because they have to. This battle is going to be the end of the film's storyline. Tom Cruise having been accepted as a samurai and able to fight Hiroyuki Sanada to a draw with a bokken after less than a year of training because magic, must complete his arc of redemption and slay his phantoms, and the samurai must lose because of history. Following the logic road laid down in the first sequence of the battle, the samurai should have withdrawn into the mountains, as being without firearms or artillery. They have no way of repeating this success on this ground. Instead, they stay because of some semi-invented claptrap about being unable to retreat in the face of the enemy. As a result, Imperial artillery, superior numbers, and weaponry do what they do, and all the skill and planning goes out of the window for a do-or-die cavalry charge in which, well, they'll die. What's my point here? Battles in movies, unless the movie is about a battle, are there to move the plot along and establish or resolve things, and it's really hard to do believably. You can't easily make the guys you're rooting for lose in a logical and realistic way. The start of this battle was impressive, in that it tried to show more than just a free-for-all scrum. But it had to dissolve into that, because the plot required it for the good guys to lose without actually being defeated. Okay. Now we've wasted this amount of our lives on these points, Let's hit the questions. First up, we have at Rambling Sing, asking about when they cut the young samurai's hair off, and what is the significance of hair within samurai culture. The significance of hair in East Asia is rooted, should you pardon the pun, amongst other things in Confucianist teachings that ordain that everything in and on your body was a gift from your parents, and as such, you have no right to do anything but take care of it. As such, the cutting of hair is often associated with deep mourning or distress, but this would depend if you were a devoted follower of Chinese philosophy. Additionally, and more specific to Japanese warrior culture, where hair was absolutely crafted and in some cases partly shaved, the manner of hairstyle you wore by this period identified your social class. The classic bushi haircut, or chonmage, identified a samurai as it apparently used to help keep their helmets on, or kabuto, in place, so only warriors would wear them, and so to have the top knot cut off in such a shameful fashion is not just a physical assault, but a deep psychological one against the very essence of you and your ancestors, which in former times would have required either vengeance or possibly even seppuku. Into old age, men with thinning hair would take great care to still dress what was left of it into the chonmage, or even adopt wigs for formal and official events so as to maintain their standing. Notably, the dismantling of the warrior class during the Meiji period meant that most samurai had to cut their hair, though in fact this may not have been the case overall. The famous director Akira Kurosawa, born in 1910, recalled that his father still wore his hair in the classic samurai manner. At Bree W74 wants to look at the battles, which pit raw peasant infantry against samurai, and then trained regulars and artillery against the same. And I think we have covered this to some extent, actually, but a few other nuances would include that the samurai themselves were behind the modernization of the armed forces, that the bakufu, or the military government of the Edo period, was using regular troops and traditional troops to put down rebellions, such as that which occurred in Mito domain between 1864 and 1865. Choshu rebellion as well, and so by 1877 the Satsuma forces would probably have looked like a mixture of the opposing sides in the first battle, with less armor, and these would have fought the Imperial Japanese army in the final battle. In terms of tactics, the advantage was always with the newly drilled and experienced regulars, with percussion rifled muskets backed up with swords and artillery, some of it rifled, rather than the old samurai levy, which by 1868 was already on the way out as a result of progressive daimyos, feudal lords, on both sides trying to modernize their armies. On the score of modernizing armies, at Andy JMS asked why Tom isn't playing a French officer. Well, as you say, it's partially because it's an American movie. But you're also right that the USA didn't have a large part to play in advising the Emperor and his generals on how to update the army. The main reason for this is that between 1861 and 1864, the United States Army had to put down its own rebellion and then occupy a large chunk of its own territory. So at the time when Japan was looking for military influence, the USA was busy elsewhere. So to begin with, the Japanese studied Dutch writings on European tactics and consulted with other Europeans. European military thinking would also have been deemed more fitting for the Japanese to adopt, because we're fancy, as it was the European allies that had humbled China. Famously, a French military mission was sent to aid the Bakufu in training a modern army, but these officers, ended up on the losing side in the Boshin War. The British and the Prussians, as well, had a hand to play in advising on military matters, and the British were especially active in reforming the Japanese navy. However, by the time of the Satsuma Rebellion, all the official and probably unofficial Europeans aiding Japan's military revolution would have been on the imperial side. Our next question comes from a questing vole, and he suggests focusing on a few things like the training scene and the battle in the woods to discuss the new army, plus the end scene with the emperor for the transition from Edo into Meiji. And that's an interesting way to go. So briefly, the new army actually goes back to the 1850s, or at least its traditions do, when the individual daimyos and the bakufu began investing in European-style troops. Witnesses suggest that by the 1860s, these troops had achieved a large number, and for some, a good level of discipline. These troops engaged with each other during the Boshin War. The battle in the woods suggests that the proficiency of the new army was poor by the 1870s, but in the Choshu Rebellion of 1864-1866 and in the 1868 Battle of Toba Fushimi, it was proved that the regular infantry of the daimyos were far superior to samurai courage, as indeed was the case in 1877. And we should remember that the Satsuma samurai and the regular troops were amongst those that defeated the bakufu with modern firearms and artillery in 1868. As for the Meiji transition, this is a more or less Meiji and Showa view of the world. Meiji wanted to break the power of the samurai class, and did so. He then allowed a more codified and structured view of them to exist as part of his unifying heritage project, recreating the centrality of the Edo system through his own societal, social, and legal reforms which looked to Europe for inspiration. Meiji wanted to break the samurai exactly because of events like the Satsuma Rebellion, rather than preserve them, due to his respect for them. That being said, the saga of Takamori Saigo, which is what the character of Katsumoto, played by Ken Watanabe, is based on, did eventually become the legend of the Last Samurai. So that's enough talking about the Last Samurai. By all means, let me know what you think of my thoughts, personal appearance, and speech patterns, and I'll be sure to read them all as soon as possible. Until then,
This is a very good conversation.